What's up, everybody? Emceemur here, and welcome back to the show. And it is time to get down on modifications on these Legends flashbacks like we've been wanting to do. And, you know, the only one that's really in my sights right now is the Legends Flashback Deluxe. Why? Because, let's be honest, the Atari Flashback X is not going to do anything the 9 doesn't already do, so on to bigger and better things. We got to clear up some things, though. There's some things going on with this. Now, you know, you think right off the cuff, right off the bat, that you've got to do an update on this thing. What we did on the last one, you got to update the firmware, right? Wrong! Couldn't be more wrong. And it's a good thing that we know what we know about this. And we only know about this because of members of Mer Nation. I want to thank Big Bad James McDermott, frequent viewer and member of Mer Nation, for writing in the comments letting me know. And this guy knows his way around an update or two, but did the update on this thing and it fries it a little bit. Man, there's games that don't work anymore. I think there was at least 4 of them, he said, that had lost complete functionality. That's not what we want, obviously. And he's working on getting it set back to factory so that we can go from there. We talked with our very own, the retro game community's very own ECMyers, fellow YouTuber. His ROMs fired right up when he put it on this thing. No update required at all. So thank you both of them for writing into the show and letting me know. That's just absolutely fantastic. EC does some really fantastic stuff over on his channel. If you haven't already checked this guy out, I'll put a link to his channel right here, so that you can check him out and see what he's all about. But yeah, this is where the networking comes in. This is where we've got to know this stuff. And you know, I would have just jumped the gun had I been any more caught up on production than I am. Luckily, I had to put this off a little way, so I was able to get this information in time to not make the same mistakes, or to learn where we were going with this. I mean, I contacted AtGames support initially. I wanted to make sure I was getting off on the good foot. I assumed there would just be a new update. There's not. You know, initially they wrote back to me and said, you know, it's the update from the old one. That's the update. It's not. They did write back to clarify that no, that's not it. There just isn't one at this time. Okay. Turns out there's just not one, and there's not going to be one, I don't guess. There's no need for one. There just isn't a need for one. There's no need to update this thing. The ROMs will work. And we're going to show you what's necessary to add those to an SD card and plug and play those bad boys on your system today. A couple important things to touch on before we get into customizing these things, okay? As with the last unit, you want to make sure you use no larger than a 16 gigabyte SD card. Anything smaller is fine, but nothing bigger than 16 gigabytes. Got to be that. Somebody wrote in the comment section of one of the previous videos and asked, are the arcade sticks compatible with this thing? And from what I can tell, yes, they are. I use the Genesis arcade stick that I have on the shelf. Happens to have the Genesis plug, of course. It's a Genesis product. So yes, it plugs and plays. So I mean, as long as it has that kind of pin connector, I would assume that it does work, but can't always assume. But that's the amount of testing I was able to do with it, and it did work fine. It'd be better if it had 6 buttons. It does not. So obviously it's not an ideal unit to use on this in every case, but there you have it. It's compatible. It does work. Last but not least, before we get into customizing this thing, we've already talked about games not working after updates, the fact that you don't need to do an update, the fact that you don't want to do an update. Before you do anything to this machine and alter it in any way, shape, or form, if you were at all worried about your warranty, if you are at all worried about this thing functioning by the time you're done doing anything to it whatsoever, stop right there. Just stop. Because the machine's pretty killer as it sits. Don't, you know, if you don't want to mess it up, don't do any of this. That's what I can tell you. This is highly experimental. So if you're worried about the functionality of it, stop right there. I was not. I bought the thing knowing that we were going to get into this. So that's all the disclaimers up front. That's all I can think of that you need to know. Now let's get into some action. Once again, for help in the ROMs department, the man with the ROM set that's the absolute bomb set, we're going to turn to the ever so talented John at GenXGrownUp John?
Hey there, Emceemur Nation. It's John from GenXGrownUp. Once again, I was honored that Emceemur hit me up when he was ready to boost this little flashback box and put some ROMs on it. We did it before with the Atari, we did it with Sega. So you can see that I have my library of Nintendo stuff, but I can't just hand it over to him. You gotta kind of tweak it for this flashback to understand what's going on with ROMs. So while this wonderful wealth of ROMs I have is curated, it's certainly not ready to put into a flashback on an SD card. We've got some work to do. So first you'll notice that all the ROMs I have are nicely zipped up with a .zip. They're compressed as they should be. So I'm going to start here by extracting all those archives into a flat folder called NES. Yeah, as you can see, we're looking at thousands of archives that have to be extracted here. And that's going to take a few minutes. I won't bore you with that. Let's jump forward to when that's done so we can move forward. Well, the Super Nintendo are still unpacking, but the NES ones are done. So let's start by tidying those up. Next thing we want to do is we've got to take out all the spaces. That's where the advanced renamer comes into play. I've used this before on other videos I did here with Emceemur. So what you can do is take every single file, you can drag it down into the advanced renamer, and then we can perform actions on all 3,690 of those files at once, rather than trying to mess with them individually. Now you see we've got all the NES ROMs here in Advanced Renamer, so let's perform some renaming methods. Let's set these up. We're going to start with a replace. We're going to replace everywhere there is a space with nothing. So you can't see it, there's a space there and there's nothing there. And you can see the comparison between like this ROM and the one with no spaces, so that's great. But we also, because we've got to put all these together in one folder, I also want to let Mur know this is an NES or SNES ROM. So we're also going to add a name at the beginning of it. So right at the beginning, we're going to put NES dash, and that will put this NES prefix right at the beginning of every single ROM. And finally, we have to make sure that every single one of these ROMs has the .NES extension. Most of them do, but what we're going to do is just add a new name rule here that applies just to the extension. And we're going to make sure that every single one of them has the .NES. So in one fell swoop, we're going to run this batch. It's going to take the spaces out, put NES at the head, and make sure the file extension is right. And then we'll move on to the Super Nintendo. Off we go. I've got the Super Nintendo files into Advanced Renamer, but we want to do some slightly different functions on them. We want the add to, instead of adding NES, have it add SNES, of course. And we actually need the file name extension to not be NES, but to be FIG. I'm actually not familiar with that one. Normally these are like MGDs or SFCs or something, but Flashback wants an FIG, a .fig file. So again, with just a single batch file, I'm going to take out the space, I'm going to put the SNES at the front, I'm going to change the file name so it works for the Flashback. The last step then is I have to create an archive for Mur. So we need to make a folder called Game. Into that, we're going to copy all of these SNES ROMs that are nicely renamed, as well as all of these NES ROMs that are nicely renamed. And because they have to be in the same folder, luckily, we named them uniquely with an S or NES prefix. He'll be able to find out what is what. And that is pretty much it. At this point, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take that game folder, I'm going to zip it up into a single archive, pass it over to Emceemur via Dropbox. He'll put that on the SD card, and we'll find out how he does. So, Mur, back to you, man.
So if you've got your SD card set up right, you've got one folder, it's named Game, and your ROMs are in it, then the SD tab on the menu on screen will no longer be yellow and you will be able to select it, revealing your added ROMs. All 7,000 of them bad boys. Now, normally we would have gone through an update procedure first. Not doing that here. I'm scrolling through and I begin to test a few out. We're already playing some classic favorites in no time. Fantastic stuff, as I always say. And we've got zany hacks and brews on here, as well as pretty expensive rarities. And that's why this thing starts to make sense, because this is easy to do. Okay, and with the SD card and tax, you're still under $60 for this thing, for this experience, versus over $100 for a built Pi or EverDrive cart. We've got NES games, and then we've got Super Nintendo games too. Over 7,000 total on this unit now, and while some of that is obviously versions of, same games from other regions, there's nothing missing from this build that I can see, and the games I'm seeing. I mean, what is it? The Slayer's got an RPG? the Slayers. And no American release. I'm dead. And now I need to learn Japanese. Look at this jewel right here from the Bitmap Brothers, and that's not the last time you're going to hear about them on this show. I promise you that, but gods. This is a gem. This kind of platforming. Exploration. I mean, it's so great to have this and everything else on such a compact but also affordable unit, and it succeeds where the previous model failed me, by allowing Nintendo ROMs. Now, will this one hold Sega and Atari too? Well, we gotta leave some action for the follow-up vid. All the more reason to make sure you're subscribed to the Emceemur Show and don't miss out on that, and subsequent live streams showcasing the gameplay. That's how we get down. So that's the long and the short of it. The Legends Flashback Deluxe. This thing already has more games on it now than the previous model. And that's without doing the Sega stuff. You know, again, we've got some stuff to look at in a follow-up episode, but the most important thing to me on this one was to get Nintendo ROMs on one of these things. Specifically, the Super Nintendo. I actually don't own a Super Nintendo EverDrive. I don't know why. I just haven't got to that one yet. But, you know, and again, I've got ways to play all the games anyway, you know, besides even just the collection. But wanted to make sure that would work on this thing. I was hoping that it would. And it does. We got some great stuff on this machine to play. And again, you got to look at the price point. You got to think about those things. Is this for you? Is this something that you want to own? So, I don't know. It's kind of neat, but we're just messing around with it. Kicking around some ideas, kicking those ideas around the community. I want to thank James McDermott for writing in. I want to thank Big Bad ECMyers for writing in. Thank you for letting us know all that intel. I mean, that's just great stuff, man. That's when we're coming together. That's when we're making things happen. That's why we're here. I mean, just really amazing stuff. I want to know what you thought about what you saw here today. And it may not be all you're going to see. We're going to have more things added to this thing, hopefully in the future, if me and some of these other folks we're networking with have anything to say about it. But, you know, we got subsequent live streams to look forward to. We're going to look at the gameplay on this thing even more in depth than we did today. I want to do that with you. So let me know what you think about everything that you saw here today and what you think about this thing as a whole in the comment section below. I want to get a conversation going with you right here on the Emceemur Show, something that we do a lot of. And most importantly, if you have not already done so, I need you to like this video. I hope that you did like this video, and you've got to subscribe to Mer Nation, be a part of Mer Nation, we're rising up with the fantastic things that we do right here on the show. You need to be a part of it. Make sure that you smack that notification bell so you are the first to know when new content goes live, because you know that I love making it for you. I want to thank EC. I want to thank James. I want to thank Big John at GenXGrownUp and the whole GenXGrownUp crew, and I want to thank all of you for watching. Emceemur signing off to the next episode, and I will see each and every one of you again next time.